With the nation on lockdown, people are baking more than the UK's flour supply chains can keep up with. So with less of this coveted white gold on the shelves, I'm catching up with our wonderful taste test baker.
Hi, I'm Dan Lepard. I'm author of The Handmade Loaf, the sourdough book, short and sweet, but also I'm a baking expert.
And Dan's going to share how to make your own flour at home, and importantly, how you can substitute plain, self-raising and strong flour in your recipes.
The way this is done is much more low-tech, and it's one that really excites me because it's something you can do without too much financial outlay. All you do is soak your rice for a couple of hours, or if you're using lentils or chickpeas, soak them overnight just in cold water at room temperature, then drain them, put them in the blender, and then just cover them with water and switch it on until they turn to a puree. And this is what we'd call wet milling. Now this wet milling is great, especially if you want to make pancakes, or even if you wanted to, say, thicken a sauce with it. With the more neutral ones like rice, you could make custards out of them. You could put them even into a cake mix. You could fold egg white through them and make them into a souffle.
You'll need a food processor or blender, and if you don't have one, a pestle and mortar should also work.
When you're using a flour like this, you have to remember that it is gluten-free, and gluten is the thing that's kind of holding your loaf together or holding your cake together. So if you were to use some of this wet mixture in a cake, you're going to need other ingredients in there. What I tend to do is add in some oats, add in some things like psyllium husk, even add in a little bit of gluten-free flour if you have it, in order to hold everything together. Say you've made a mixture of rice and lentils into this wet, thick paste, and you want to turn it into a self-raising flour. You will also, in addition to eggs, need to add some raising agent. So for every 300 grams of this wet mixture, add about 3/4 of a teaspoon of bicarb soda and 3/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar, or 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. One of the tricky things is that it is a wet mixture. Generally with bread making, we want something we can knead and shape and flat, so it's just harder to bulk it together. If you have any flour at all, you could use this wet mixture to replace the liquid in the recipe, and that will mean that you're kind of using half and half. A strong flour can only be made from high protein wheat. Wheat flour and rye, spelt, barley, etc. contain protein components that form something called gluten, and the strong in the name tells you that it contains really high levels of these components and will produce a very elastic, gluten-rich dough. Wet mill flours don't contain any gluten, so you need to use them differently to strong flour, e.g. make flatbreads, or add something like psyllium husk to emulate the function of the gluten that would have been found in the flour. You can use any grain you can get hold of, any sort of wheat grain, if you're using one of these tabletop mills, or one that is an attachment that fits into a mixer. Go for different wheat varieties, barley varieties, rye, spelt, kamut. There are so many these softer grains that are really easy to mill through these milling machines. The flour that you make can be used wherever you see plain flour in a recipe. It will contain some of the whole grain, so your cake will come out heavier or your pastry will come out heavier, but deliciously soft and moist, so it's not necessarily a bad thing. If you're using the stronger flours in order to make strong white flour, the grain that you put through your dry mill will come out very much like a strong wholemeal bread flour. If your recipe says self-raising, all you need to do for about every 250 grams of your wholemeal flour is add 2 teaspoons of baking powder in order to get roughly the same wholemeal self-raising flour that you're used to.
Let us know your tips for making your own flour at home in the comments below.